All right. Hello and welcome everyone. And thank you very much for joining us for another BenQ webinar today. My name's Dan and I take care of marketing activities here at BenQ in our Sydney office. So really excited about today's webinar. We've got a really great special guest and some really great insights for you to take home and or back to your school. So today's webinar is security tips for your blended classroom. So again, thank you everyone for taking the time to be here with us today, and let's get kicked off. So just some housekeeping before we start. So as always, this webinar is being recorded, so you can check back on the BenQ Australia YouTube channel for the upload, or I'll be following up with a follow-up email afterwards to send the link over to you. So feel free to rewatch the webinar, or you can pass on to your colleagues. If you have any questions at any time throughout the webinar, you can use the Q&A function down at the bottom of the screen, and we'll get back to you at the Q&A section after the webinar today. If you'd like to get in touch with us after the webinar, as always, you can email us at bqausales@benq.com. So a little bit about the agenda today. It's a quick one. So first of all, we'll have some classroom security tips from John Bigelow of Education Technology Solutions. A little bit more about John in a moment. We'll have a quick overview of BenQ's secure education solutions, and then we'll have the Q&A. So let's get to know John for those of you who aren't familiar with his work. So John Bigelow is the editor of Education Technology Solutions, Australia's leading resource for the use of technology in schools. For over 2 decades, John has been writing and presenting on the use of technology in education, in addition to his role as editor of Australia's leading security publication, Security Solutions. So now for the first time, John brings together his experience in both EdTech and security to provide a unique perspective around how educators and school leaders can manage online learning safely and effectively. So John, thank you so much for being with us today. We're really excited to have you here. I know you've been on a webinar before and it was really great. So thanks so much for being here. So I'll hand it over to you and the floor is yours.
Dan, thank you very much for that. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome very much. Welcome to the presentation this afternoon. I'm just waiting for the camera to kick in and then we'll be able to get things going. Not that you really need to be able to see me. It's not like I'm the most important person around, but how are we going?
You're good to go, John.
Okay. So basically the conversation that we're having today is about classroom and home security. So obviously in the last 12 to 18 months, there has been a pretty significant shift in the way that the world works as far as the COVID outbreaks is concerned and what that means for you in the classroom. And I mean, we've just learned here in Victoria today, we're going back into another 7-day lockdown. So I think this kind of, teaching from the classroom, teaching from home type methodology, and all kids back here in Victoria now are apparently going back into remote learning. So I think this is going to be something that keeps rolling out now over the next, probably at least for the rest of this year, if not for the ongoing future. And what does that mean to you as educators and why is that important? Well, if we go back to March of 2020, we find that UNESCO were saying that according to them, sorry, I'm just going to get into the right slide here. According to UNESCO, in March of late 2020, over 1.5 billion pupils, or 87% of the world's student population across 165 countries had, at the time, been affected by school closures caused by COVID-19. Now, what that essentially means is that, sorry, I keep getting beeps here. I've got to get onto the right spot. What that essentially means is that we've gone from having this nice protected environment in our classroom where we've got IT support staff and IT network administrators and all these other people managing and monitoring our network and ensuring that we're up to date and doing all those sorts of things, into a completely different environment, which has left us a lot more susceptible to cybercrime. Now, normally when we're running these kinds of presentations, most of the people in them on some level say, yeah, but cybercrime, what's that really got to do with me? You know, I'm not a large institution. I'm not a bank. I'm not a big commercial business. I'm a teacher. Why would I be the victim of cybercrime? And again, in order to understand that question, we need to first understand some of the myths and misconceptions around cybercrime. So if we take a quick look at some of the statistics here, then, you know, first of all, we have this misconception that cybercrime is perpetrated by people in hoodies, you know, sitting in their basement, typing away, trying to hack into our computer systems, almost like, you know, someone walking up and down the street, rattling our front door or rattling our windows, looking for a way to get into our house. The reality is this Hollywoodized version of hackers that we're seeing on screen now is just not the way it works anymore. Virtually all cybercrime is a result of organized crime gangs operating out of places like Russia and other parts of Europe and various different areas of the world. They're all basically automated programs which are run off the shelf, available freely from places on the dark web, and it's all completely automated. So, you know, we haven't got people in black hoodies walking up and down the street, rattling our front door and our windows trying to get in. We've got automated bots cruising up and down the street in the thousands, checking every window, every roof tile, every section of your front door, everywhere they could possibly get in until they find an opening. And that's, you know, perhaps best demonstrated by some of the stats that are around this stuff. So let's have a look, you know, in, where are we here? Yeah, a cyber attack, according to, I think it was the SANS Institute, a cyber attack is attempted every 39 seconds around the world. The last year, 700 million people in 21 countries experienced some form of cybercrime. The damage related to cybercrime is projected to hit 6 trillion by the end of this year alone. And ransomware attacks rose 148% in March of 2020. And again, that coincides with the kickoff of COVID and everyone moving to remote work and learning from home and teaching from home environments, because cyber criminals saw the amount of vulnerability that were happening around this and realized, hey, this is a fantastic opportunity for us to get out and try and make some headway here. And also cloud-based attacks increased by 630% between January and April of 2020. Now, the ransomware stuff is important, and we're going to come back to that later in the presentation. But we're also going to talk a little bit about phishing attempts. Phishing attempts have increased by more than 660% since March the 1st, 2020. Think about that, 660%. That's got to tell you a little bit about the mindset of some of these organized crime groups and cyber criminals looking to try and get some easy gains during COVID. The reason we're seeing such an increase in crime is because we've moved out of the school environment where, as I mentioned earlier, we had you know, a team of IT professionals in some schools, one or two in others, that were sitting there managing the networks for us, ensuring that we were safe, ensuring that malicious code couldn't get in, that our computers and our laptops were all up to date, that everything was patched. And as educators, we didn't really have to think about it a great deal. However, COVID kicked off last year, and before we knew it, we went from the classroom to teaching in an environment that probably looks something a little bit more like this, where we're sitting on the couch with Fluffy there doing reports and talking to students and marking up school work. And all of a sudden, that trusted network that we were in previously, where we had you know, a monitored network and we had everyone updating the latest software on our laptop for us and all those sorts of things, they're not there anymore. You're flying solo. And again, as we move into and out of the school environment, we're going to have this rolling situation where sometimes we'll have access to IT network support, sometimes we won't. So it's about doing everything that you possibly can to limit the vulnerabilities and mitigate the risks where possible. One of the biggest problems that we saw emerging in the teach from home or remote education environment last year was Zoom bombing. You know, and video bombing or Zoom bombing, it could be Teams, it could be Zoom, it could be Cisco, it could be WebEx, but we're just picking on Zoom because that was the one that seemed to attract the most attention. Well, I'll show you an example of what it looks like for those of you who haven't heard of Zoom bombing.
Hi, Trinity.
Hi.
Your camera's not on.
Hey, Trinity.
Okay. Who is Joe Lopez? Who's that? Is that
What do you mean, Steve? It's me.
Steve?
Yeah, Steve.
Who are you talking to?
You.
You're not in my class.
Is this like a joke or no?
No, it's not. Are you in elementary functions?
Yeah.
All right, so we won't spend too much time going through that, but basically what you saw there was a group of students that decided they were going to prank a teacher at one of the local schools by getting into the Zoom meeting and interrupting his conversation with one of his students. And that is, trust me, I'm sure you've heard the stories, that is by far one of the more innocuous instances of Zoom bombing. We've had people putting up pornography in the middle of Zoom screens. We've had people doing inappropriate things in the middle of Zoom meetings. I saw an example of one student sitting there smoking a joint and drinking a beer and thinking it was all hilarious, and which raises the questions: how do kids get into these Zoom meetings, or how does this Zoom bombing happen? And of course, the biggest challenge, if we go to how to avoid some of this stuff, is ensure that you're running the latest version of any video conferencing software. If you want to know how to avoid getting caught out, make sure that you've got the most up-to-date version. Always check that there's updates and that they're installed. Of course, the next thing is, and possibly the most important tip, do not share your virtual meeting details via social media. This was something that educators were doing a lot in the early days. They would have a virtual classroom for a specific group coming up, and they'd put it on the school intraweb, or they might put it on a social media page. And of course, that's pretty much the equivalent of going out and we'll remember Corey Worthington. His parents went away for the weekend. He decided he was going to have a party. He put the invitation on Facebook, and before you knew it, there were about 758 kabillion people at his house. So we don't want to post virtual class or social Zoom or WebEx meetings on social media platforms. Keep those details secret. The other one too is obviously whenever you have a video platform like Zoom or WebEx or Teams or whatever, you have a meeting ID. Never, ever, ever share your personal meeting ID with anyone. This is the equivalent of giving people your banking PIN code. And of course, understand the security settings of the apps that you're using. And the reason that's important is because you need to know how to force people into a waiting room before they're actually allowed into the actual meeting. So you can see on the list of attendees who's coming in, and then you choose to admit or not admit them. If you don't recognize the person, don't admit them. It's also important to understand security settings so that you can do things like mute people or even eject them from the classroom if you need to, and ensure that you can limit the amount of discussion that goes on via chat between students and other participants. Yeah, you don't want side conversations going on where kids are chatting away and doing all sorts of silly things in the side while you're trying to teach. So the next challenge that a lot of educators were finding from a security point of view during a remote learning environment was they were either running classes from home, or they were recording classes from home or other locations, and had students working remotely from their home. And this in itself brought up a couple of interesting challenges, not the least of which is being mindful of what's in the background of what your camera sees, and mindful of what's in the background of what the student's camera sees. And I'll give you an example of that. If let's say you're teaching a year 9 class, and you've got your typical year 9 boy who's got his pin-up girl posters in the background on the wall of his bedroom, and his laptop's in his bedroom or his computer's in his bedroom. You've got to be thinking, gee, is that sort of imagery really the kind of thing that I want to be seen on a class chat, especially if you're intending to record the class chat so that it can be put up online later on for other class members who weren't able to make it, or for whatever the purpose may be. You also need to be mindful of what's in your background. If you're in the kitchen and you've got dirty dishes around everywhere, or, your husband or your wife is wandering through in their dressing gown or whatever it may be, just think about what's in the background. Also, we've gone through these first two, but be mindful of who can see your computer. This is something that we don't think about very much, but let's say I'm sitting there and I'm having a one-on-one student conference with someone after school. and I'm in the local cafe. I'm down there grabbing a coffee and I'm just sitting there having a chat or whatever it may be with that student on my computer. Who else can see the student that I'm talking to? They may not be able to hear it, but they might be able to see who I'm talking to. Or even if I'm sitting there correcting and writing reports, if the cafe's in your local area, then there are probably people who are parents of kids that go to that school who might be able to see what's on your screen, and they might know the student that you're writing the report about or whatever it may be. So it's be very, very careful about what people can actually see on your screen. This then brings us to the next challenge that you have whenever you're working outside the trusted school environment, but this is something that you should be looking at all the time anyway with your own computer, just for your own safety's sake. And that is always ensuring that you are installing and maintaining threat protection software on your computer. If you don't have some sort of threat protection software, then really you're just leaving yourself open, vulnerable to attack. I think the SANS Institute some years ago came out with a statistic quite a while ago now saying that the average PC straight out of the box when connected to the internet will last about 30 seconds before it's infected by a virus. And there's this common misconception that a lot of Mac users have where they think, oh, I'm on a Mac, I don't have to worry about it, I don't need virus protection. Absolutely you do. Never for a second believe that you don't need some sort of virus protection. And there are a ton of great virus protection packages out there. Having no virus protection on your computer is really pretty much the equivalent of allowing some stranger to walk up and peer into your computer and see what's on there. And it might be student records, it might be student reports, it might be video you've had with student discussions. Anytime you're not using some sort of threat protection software, it's the equivalent of basically not putting locks on your front door and not putting locks on your windows. And again, there are plenty of great packages out there. We've got things like Kaspersky, McAfee, which we'll talk a little bit about later on because it comes preloaded on some of the BenQ products. You've got Norton LifeLock, you've got Bitdefender, you've got WebRoot. There are a ton of great packages that aren't very expensive. Some of them have free demos that you can go out and you can use on your computer to ensure that people can't get in, that you can protect against malicious software, malware, viruses, all sorts of stuff. Now, the reason this becomes so important, apart from just stopping people from actually getting in and seeing what's on your computer and potentially, hacking into personal details, is that you do not want to wake up in the morning and see this. This is what a ransom attack looks like, or ransomware attack looks like. And I'm sure you've all heard about these in the media. This is the beginning of a very bad day. Basically, someone's managed to hack your computer, or you've downloaded some software which has given them control of your computer. The whole thing's now locked. You can't get any data out of it. So you're right in the middle of report writing season. You've done all your students' reports, but you can't access any of them because the computer's locked up. Or even worse, they get something onto your computer, which you then take back into the school network, and it locks up the entire school network. So the best way to mitigate against this, again, as we just said, have some sort of threat protection. The second best way to mitigate against it is backup. Always backup. Have a regular backup. If you don't have a backup routine, start one tomorrow. You can go to Officeworks or any sort of store like that, and you can buy a 4 terabyte drive for somewhere around between $150 and $200. And 4 terabytes will be more than enough for most laptops. Plug it in, make sure it's getting backed up every single day. If you're ultra paranoid like I am, then you have 2 backup drives. You use one on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, and you use the alternate one on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and weekends. So that way, if drive A gets corrupted with the ransomware attack, then you can go back to drive B, or vice versa. It just doubles your chances of not getting caught out by that ransomware. So how do we prevent ransomware attacks apart from backup? Well, obviously, the first one is to keep your operating system patched and up to date to ensure that you have fewer exploits available on your computer. You get little pop-ups all the time saying there's updates available, updates available. Don't just ignore them, execute them. Make sure if you're not at school where an IT manager is able to do it for you, you're frequently and often updating the software on your computer. The second one is to not install any software that if you don't know what it is and you don't know where it's from. And certainly don't give it administrator level privileges. you know, as we all start using programs like Zoom and Teams and other things like that, you know, there's a million great plugins you can get for Zoom that allow your head to look like a potato or a donut or whatever it might look like. When you're installing those plugins, it'll say, hey, you know, this plugin needs access to your computer and all the rest of it. Again, if you don't know exactly where it's come from, if you don't know exactly what it is, do not give it privileges, do not install it. Make sure you're running antivirus software. We've already covered this one. We don't need to go over it again. And of course, back up your files frequently and often. If you're running a Mac, it has a Time Machine in it so that it will just do it for you automatically. Windows has similar functions. Linux, I'm sure, has something like that as well. Take advantage of it and use it. So the next biggest vulnerability that you need to worry about as educators, and not just educators, but as a member of the general public, is phishing. Phishing is a deliberate attempt to try and steal information from your computer via email in the form of, well, it'll often come to you as things like an email from your bank, or other financial institutions, or possibly a government department, or even service providers. Sometimes, you know, you'll get fake emails from groups like Apple or Netflix or whatever it may be. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to elicit information from you, like usernames, passwords, codes that will allow them to either get into your computer or get into your bank accounts. Okay. So there are a couple of different kinds of phishing attacks. There are phishing attacks aimed at you as an individual, and there are phishing attacks aimed at your school directly. And I'll give you an example of the difference between the two. A phishing attack aimed at you as an individual might be something like I just said then, you know, it's a fake email from your bank or from the ATO, or someone saying, you know, you need to act now, you need to log into this particular site and give us your details so that we can address this particular error. An attack, a phishing attack or business email attack that might be aimed at the school would be something like, you know, if you have a regular supplier that you deal with who provides you with computer equipment, or you have a school camp provider where you go and do school camps regularly, and you get an email that says, you know, you need to pay this invoice from ABC Computers today. Always, anytime you receive an unexpected invoice from a supplier, a provider, a partner of the school, if you don't know what it is or you're not expecting it, ring them and check. And make sure that you have all the bank details recorded of all the people that you deal with and pay, because if the bank details are different from what you've got on file, it's more than likely it's a phishing attack where someone's trying to scam information from you or try and get you to pay money into a dodgy account. Now, the other way that you can protect yourself against phishing and other kinds of malicious attacks is training. As educators, you need to understand what it is. Whether you're an IT manager, you need to have your teachers understand, or if you're a teacher yourself or a principal or a school leader, you need to understand the signs and symptoms of an attack. So what does that look like? What are the 6 signs that you've been compromised? Number 1, you get a ransomware message. That was that thing that we saw on the screen before, saying, oh, your computer's been locked. You need to pay us $1 billion in Bitcoin to an anonymous account, or whatever it may be. That's a bad start to a bad day. Number 2, you get a fake antivirus message. Now, these are frequent, far more frequent than people might, you know, think. And a fake antivirus message is, let's just say, you know that you're running Kaspersky, or you know that you're running McAfee, and you suddenly get a virus warning from a different software package saying, we've detected a virus on your computer. If it's not something that you're running, then it's going to be fake. People don't run software for you. If you're not running any antivirus at all, which is a problem in itself that we spoke about earlier, and you suddenly get messages saying, we've detected a virus on your computer. Again, logically, how does that work? It doesn't work. It's a scam. Avoid it. Do not click on it. Another big one is you have unwanted browser tools appearing in the toolbar down the bottom of your computer for programs that you don't recognize, which would tend to indicate that somehow your computer's been compromised. You've now got a program running in the background. If that happens, shut your computer down immediately. If you can't get access to your school IT manager or someone within the school in an IT role that knows what they're doing, you know, you've always got the option of taking it to the local IT shop, computer store, and seeing if someone there can help you. Or in the worst case scenario, if you absolutely can't wait until you can get back to the school IT department and get them to take a look at it, just turn it off. Or if you have to, do a clean reinstall. Just go to one of your backups. Remember, we spoke about those before, super important. Go to a backup, wipe the hard drive, reinstall from the backup, get that stuff off your computer. But the best case scenario, just shut your computer down until you can get to help. Your internet searches are redirected. This is another classic sign that you have been compromised. If you're in Google and you type in www. We're here in Blackburn, so we're going to say Blackburn High School, and you suddenly end up on a shopping site, right? And you do that 2 or 3 times and you keep going to sites that you weren't intending to go to. This is a classic sign that your computer's been compromised. Same steps as before. Shut it down, take it back to the school, get the IT network administrator to look at it. If you're in lockdown like we are now and you can't go back to the school for the next few days and you need to use your computer, the only course of action may be wipe it, restore from a backup. But just be mindful. That's a lot of work and there's a lot of steps involved in doing that. But, you know, keep these signs in mind. You need to know what all of these look like to know whether or not you've been compromised. You see frequent random pop-ups appearing on your computer. If you're getting pop-up windows all the time for stuff that you don't normally look at and you don't know about, do something about it. And last but not least, your friends receive random social media invitations from you that you didn't send. You know, you start, and you'll know when this happens, you'll start getting phone calls from people going, hey, did you send me a Facebook invitation, or did you send me an invitation to this event, or whatever it may be, or I'm getting these weird emails from you. What are they about? If that starts happening, again, same steps as before. Shut it down, seek advice, don't use the computer until you've managed to clean it, because otherwise, just like COVID, you can pass it on to other people without even realizing that you're doing it. So it's time for us to come back to the school environment. We're working with other staff members. We're getting back to work with our students. We've been outside of that school trusted network for a week, a day, a month, whatever it may be. It's unrealistic to expect that the IT department is going to vet every single machine that's coming back into that environment before we start using them again. So the question then becomes, if we don't know whether or not we can trust our computer because we've been outside of a trusted network, but we have to use it on the network in order to do our job, what solutions are available to us that won't necessarily put the network and other staff members at risk? Well, this is where you can look at great tools like, for example, the InstaShow and the RP flat panels from BenQ. And the reason I point these two out, aside from it being a BenQ event, but the reason I point these two out specifically is because they're hardware-based solutions that don't require specific software in order for you to run them. And so you don't have to download things. You don't have to put on additional software and all the rest of it. The BenQ InstaShow, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, we like this because it's a hardware-based solution. As I mentioned before, there are no drivers, there's no software needed. It features strong encryption. It uses proprietary algorithms specifically to facilitate the fast, smooth streaming of video. And this is a big one. For those of you who use a lot of video in the classroom, and let's face it, we all use lots of video for everything these days, the InstaShow allows you to transmit full HD video between your laptop and the RP flat panel using the dongle that comes in the InstaShow virtually instantly and uninterrupted. The other thing that's really great about the InstaShow in conjunction with the flat panel, the RP flat panel, is that it gives you the ability to collaborate between multiple people. You know, you can have multiple different InstaShow dongles plugged into the USB ports on your computer, other staff members' computers, students' computers, and you can just, with the push of a button, you can switch between who's actually presenting at the time, and you can all share and collaborate with different information on projects, meetings, whatever it may be, and they're guest friendly. So if you've got other students coming into the classroom from another school, or if you've got other people coming in to visit the school for whatever reason, again, they don't need to download specific software or specific drivers. They literally just plug in and bang, away they go. So, in summary, what have we spoken about today? Number one, don't share your virtual classroom meeting details online. Two will come up in a minute. I mucked this up 5 seconds ago before we jumped up, but install and maintain antivirus software and malware protection. Use strong passwords, or even better, a password manager. Back up regularly, at the very least daily, if not more often. Put in place some training for staff. If you're an IT manager, if you're a staff member, go out and get some training on what it looks like to know whether or not you've been compromised, so that you can understand the signs and symptoms of an attack and what to do in that instance. And employ technology designed to allow staff to return to the classroom safely and securely without risking the school network. And the one that we mentioned before that comes up last, be mindful of what is in your background of your videos. So that's both your students' background and your background. Because again, if you're recording the virtual classroom, if you're recording the meeting and you intend to share it later on, you don't want to be looking at the video later on going, oh, wow, I didn't see that thing in the background and that's really inappropriate and I can't show that to anyone. So that's pretty much it. I hope that's given you some ideas on what to do, what you can look for, how you can protect yourself against any sort of potential cyber attack. Obviously, it's not a comprehensive review. This is only a very short presentation, but please, if you've got any questions, feel free to ask now. Otherwise, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, John. We won't sign off just straight away, but thank you very much for your presentation. And there's some really great opportunities to get better with cybersecurity when it comes to the classroom. And it sort of boggles my mind that a lot of those ones there that we think are common sense, they're actually not being adhered to. So it's definitely something we can keep working on. So thank you again, John. Everyone, we'll just go quickly through the presentation for the BenQ Education Solutions. If you've got any questions for John, throw them down in the Q&A right now, and we'll come back to them in a very, very short period of time. So, as I said, I'll quickly run through some of the key members of the BenQ Education Solution family, touching on some of the security features and benefits. So the RP series interactive flat panel is the heart of the classroom collaboration. It sort of harnesses powerful cloud whiteboarding, germ-resistant screen, air quality sensor, and an array of connectivity options, including wireless sharing and via InstaShow. InstaShow, which John covered very intensely before, the WDC20 is BenQ's no software and easy plug and play wireless presentation system. So InstaShow is the perfect solution for BYOD sharing, not to mention the added peace of mind of industry standard security like 128-bit AES encryption. Then we have Smart Projector for extending your classroom presentations and blended learning to a big screen. Taking advantage of the convenience of PC-less and wireless Android environment. So security is paramount in the education world with data breaches and network infiltration, just like John mentioned before, being commonplace in 2021. Not to mention the sensitivity of handling data and often relating to students under the age of 18. But on the other hand, kids will be kids and they love to hack things, especially now that there's a heavy focus on coding and soft skills in schools. To help mitigate some of these threats, both the RP series and the Smart Projector are preloaded with McAfee Android security software on the native Android operating system. And as we mentioned before, InstaShow offers industry-leading security features, including no executable software, industry standard network encryption, and international certification standards, including ISO 27001. So in addition to the inbuilt McAfee software on RP series, when you add a slot-in PC to any of our BenQ interactive flat panel range, you'll have the power and flexibility of a Windows operating system. So this means you have the option to run any compatible antivirus or security suite you like, and John mentioned that earlier. So coming back to InstaShow quickly, InstaShow WDC20, it's passed CVSS, which is a common vulnerability scoring system standard, and it was tested by a ISO 27001 certified security lab. What this means for your school essentially is that it ensures classrooms and meeting spaces are secure and cable-free. So how secure is your wireless presentation solution? when it comes to security, not all WPS devices are created equal. Here's 3 powerful ways that InstaShow secures your classroom presentations. So it crypts video streaming through 3 levels of WPA to AES 128-bit encryption. It isolates from the school's internal network. So essentially it creates its own network with a firewall, and you can connect to the display device through the InstaShow without having to touch the community, the company or the school network. And it's also been had a vulnerability assessment certification done by a third-party security lab, namely Onward Security. So they've certified WDC 10 and WDC 20 against some common vulnerabilities that you'll find in wireless solutions. So one of the most important things when we're creating a safe and secure wireless environment is reducing the implications of software needing to execute on a host system. InstaShow requires no downloads or execution of software to achieve a quick and efficient wireless presentation. So lastly, we've got Smart Projector. So BenQ offers device security against malware with McAfee Premium Protection app, which is preloaded on the BenQ Suggest store. And that's also on the RP series interactive flat panel as well. So McAfee auto scans connected HID devices such as USB flash drives to avoid viral infection and block the access to all the insecure websites with optimum network protection. So as part of the offer, BenQ offers a 2-year McAfee Premium protection, and you can renew that subscription by purchasing through the same app on the BenQ Suggest store. So just quickly at the end, if we give an award to the most influential device of 2021/2020, we would most certainly go to the Humble VC camera. So the RP series IFP and the Smart Projector are both compatible with external camera devices, creating the perfect environment for blended or remote style of learning. So utilizing an external conference camera gives you the flexibility to control the type of camera you choose, so based on the size of your room, and the added security of being able to unplug the device via USB when it's not being used. So we've got 3 cameras in the BenQ range: the DVY21, which is the huddle space and home camera. We've got the DVY22, which has got the wide angle lens and it can cover the medium size classrooms. And we've got the DVY23, which is a pan tilt zoom camera, which is really good for conference rooms and lecture halls. So I know I went through that very, very quickly. Hope everyone's still with us. So that brings us to the end of the presentation. So we'll just go on to the Q&A now. I'll stop sharing my screen. So John, we'll just check the Q&A box. While we wait for any questions to come through, I've actually got a couple of questions for you, if it's okay.
Sure.
So I mentioned before in the presentation that students are much more tech savvy now, especially when they're being taught coding and it's actually been put into the curriculum itself. What particularly do you see the risk or the main pain points that this sort of causes for the IT managers of schools?
I think for the IT managers and teachers in general, just bearing in mind that kids are a lot more tech savvy than what has been referred to for some time now as digital natives, means that we need to be aware of the fact that they're probably a lot more informed than a lot of teachers are about how some of these systems work. And there's that whole mentality of, if people can make it, people can break it. And kids love a challenge. So, there are going to be some kids who are going to want to try and get into the school network. And there are going to be other kids who, just like the challenge of seeing how far they can push boundaries. But where this becomes of significant importance for a lot of educators is with your own social media feeds. When it comes to things like Facebook and Instagram and other social media feeds, I can't tell you how important it is to have them locked down, because we all like to let our hair down on weekends. We all like to go out with our friends and do things and all the rest of it. You need to make sure that students can't get access to that, because, if I'm out at a party having a few drinks with my mates on the weekend, I don't necessarily want a whole bunch of kids looking at what I'm up to. So, they are digital natives. They will find a way to get in unless you're on your game and you're protecting yourself.
Yeah, for sure. They're very savvy, and like you said, if we made it, we can break it. Yep. The other thing you mentioned throughout your presentation that the teachers are obviously more likely to be conducting classes at home or even working on class material, and this could be a whole nother webinar on its own, this particular question, but do you have any tips for best practices for people in their home network? So say their home Wi-Fi's or devices that you're using at home rather than actually on the networks in the school in particular.
Yeah, I mean, again, look, this isn't rocket science. For years, we've been hearing physical security tips like, don't leave ladders lying around the house that make it easy for people to get access. And when you're away on holiday, don't leave your bins out the front and have your neighbors collect your mail. Well, it's really the same in the security world. If you get given a modem router by your internet service provider, whether it be Optus or Telstra or whatever it may be, it's going to come configured with a default administration password and username. Change the username and password that come as default on that router and the modem, because there are websites that publish lists of those. And that, by the way, is the same for your webcams. Some people will get these do-it-yourself DIY home security systems from Bunnings or JB Hi-Fi or whatever and put cameras up around their house, and they come pre-configured with default usernames and passwords. Change them. Because if you're sitting there with a default username and password camera behind you and you're putting in your banking details on your computer and all the rest of it, and someone can get into that camera and see what you're doing, they can see everything you're doing on your laptop. And if you don't believe me, go online and do a search. There are actually websites dedicated to being able to just go and look at what people are doing in their homes. People hack their home security cameras and then open it up to the world so that you can go and watch Bill down the street sitting there surfing Netflix at night. It's terrifying.
It really is, and it's a crazy world out there. And unfortunately, a lot of our information is out there, whether it's with our knowledge or without, or with our consent or without. So there's definitely a lot of information out there. The other one, it may not necessarily in relation to the classroom or a school, for instance, but your work in cybersecurity, you would have seen a lot of things. We talked about phishing before. So I was wondering, what are some of the more clever or more convincing phishing attempts that you've seen in your career?
Yeah, look, there's been a couple floating around in the last 12 months. One of them has been executed under the guise of being the ATO, which obviously it isn't. There are always a plethora of banking ones going around. There are ones that you'll see from Telstra and Optus wanting you to go in and, log into your account and put in your details so that they can send you a bill or whatever the case may be. Couple of things to remember, whether it's PayPal, whether it's the ATO, whether it's your local bank, they do not send you emails asking you to put in your password. It does not happen. If they need to contact you, they'll contact you directly. So if you get any sort of email asking you to put in secure details like dates of birth or passwords or credit card numbers, anything like that, put them straight in the bin.
Yep, and that's it. We're getting phishing attempts all the time. I mean, it slips through the junk mail filter. Let's be honest, the junk mail filters can't do everything. So, and they're also getting a lot more sophisticated. So they'll look real, and a lot of the time we do get fooled. So it's definitely.
They've moved over to mobile phones now. So I'm sure everyone on this presentation at some point in the last 12 months has received a dodgy call on their mobile phone saying, recorded message saying, this is the Australian Crime Authority, or this is the Australian Electoral Commission, or the ATO, you've been charged with such and such. We've all had them.
I know you're a bad boy, John, but I don't think that you should be getting nabbed in the back of a paddy wagon. But let's hope it's not true. All right, great. We did have one question from Gary, but what we'll do, Gary, we'll follow up with you after the webinar on that one and give you the information you need there. So no questions, further questions, John. So what we might do, we might sign off, but I want to say thank you very much to you, John, for joining us today again for another webinar. Hopefully we'll see you in the future on another upcoming webinar, but definitely everyone can look out for that. Also, I want to thank everyone for joining today. If you would like to get in touch with us, like I said at the start, make sure you go to, email bqausales@benq.com. I've dropped some links into the chat. So links for the interactive flat panel, InstaShow, and smart projector. I've also linked to John's website, educationtechnologysolutions.com. So you can head over to his website if you'd like to see more about his work. Having said all that, thanks so much everyone again for being here. Thank you, John, and we'll see you on the next webinar.
Thank you. See you later.